Good evening. My name's Carl Brown, and I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church. This is my home. Welcome. We're getting ready for another backyard Bible study. We are finishing up 2 Kings tonight, which really means we're finishing up an era for the people of Israel, the end of the occupation of the land before they are exiled. And so, get your Bible out, get ready, and let's get into the Word. Now, last week we talked about King Hezekiah, or Uzziah, some will call him, and he's written of with both names. And we talked about how he was a great king for most of his life, and then he made a couple of mistakes. Then he got sick, and then God healed him and gave him 15 more years. Well, when God healed him and gave him 15 more years, he also blessed him with great wealth, with great success, and a lot of honor. Matter of fact, I think he's the one who kind of came up with the aqueduct system for Jerusalem, and that was really kind of a neat thing, and that provided a lot of prestige and convenience to people, and it was just a great leap forward in architecture and engineering. And so Hezekiah had all these things, and he had went all the way to almost nothing. If you remember, when the king of Assyria came against him, he didn't even think that he had 2,000 men to put on horses, and he had already destroyed most of the cities of Judah, and this was the only one left. And then God gave them a great victory. Totally God. Hezekiah had nothing to do with it other than his humble prayer. Well, now Hezekiah has great riches, great wealth, and God's given him health. And the end of chapter 20, we find that Hezekiah, unfortunately, and this happens a lot when people come into a lot of wealth and notoriety, he got full of pride, and a Babylonian embassy came to visit him. And what did he do? He showed them everything. Now, Assyria is still the big boys in charge, but Babylon is on the rise. But they came over, and he showed them everything. He showed them all the riches he had in the temple, all the riches he had in his home, all the riches of Jerusalem. He showed them everything, and sent them on their way, just bragging about the wealth that he has. Reminds me of those TV shows. I remember when I was little, it was it Robert Leach, I think was his name, The Lives of the Rich and the Famous. And he would have a TV show every week that people just bragged about how much they'd accumulated, their wealth, their homes, their toys. And there's lots of shows like that now. But that's what Hezekiah did. He bragged to everybody about what he had. Look how awesome I am. To the Babylonians. That comes into play later. But Isaiah asked Hezekiah, he goes, "Hey, what did you show those guys? Those pagans, those potential enemies?" Hezekiah says, "I showed them everything." He says in verse 15 of chapter 20, he says, "They saw everything in my palace." Hezekiah said, "There is nothing among my treasures that I did not show them." He just brags about it. Look at verse 16. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your fathers have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. And some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood that will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." That is horrible news. That's just really bad. He's like, here you are, you bragging. You're over here bragging. And now, because you were bragging, all this is going to be taken away. Someone's going to come and they're going to take everything that you were bragging about. And more than that, some of your own kin, some of your own kids are going to become eunuchs in the palace of Babylon. And that's going to end your line And that's a terrible thing. Well, how do you think Hezekiah would react to that? Now, before, Hezekiah, when confronted like this, he reacted in deep prayer and confession and humility. This time was a little bit different. Verse 19, the word of the Lord you have spoken is good, Hezekiah replied. For he thought, will there not be peace and security in my lifetime? That's terrible. Hezekiah, I mean, that's not good. That's not a good position of his heart right there. He's like, what God has said is good because God is God and his judgment is good and doesn't really affect me. I'm going to have peace in my lifetime. Okay, I can live with it. That's terrible. Like I told you last week, so Hezekiah was a really great king. He really was in many ways. But, pride got to him, and pride can get to anybody. No one's above influence. Pride got to him, and he just did something really stupid here. And his family's going to pay the price for it. I think that's a lesson in itself. It's never just your business. Everything that you do is going to affect the people around you. You may think that you have some privacy and that you have a private life going on and think that it's not affecting anybody but you. Nobody needs to know about your business. Your business affects everyone around you. And if you're a leader, it goes far beyond that. It's more than just your family. It has far-reaching effects. So keep that in mind. And I just wanted to do that to finish up the story of Hezekiah, because that comes into play a little bit later today. All right, so that brings us to chapter 21 in 2 Kings. And chapters 21 to 25 are the end of 2 Kings. And I just want to say we've saved the best for last. The best and I should say the worst for last. So in the last few chapters here, from the kings all the way from David, ever since David, we're going to look at the worst king that there was for Judah or Israel, and we're going to have the best king that there was for Judah or Israel, all in these last chapters. Isn't that exciting? Well, we're going to start with the worst. And I mean, he was the worst. The worst king was Manasseh. And let's look at chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. It says, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He also erected altars to Baal and made Ashtoreth pole, as Ahab, the king of Israel, had done. He bowed down to all the starry host and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said in Jerusalem, I will put my name. In both courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to the starry host. He sacrificed his own son. And we see other places that he actually sacrificed several of his children. He sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced sorcery and divination, and consulted mediums and spiritualists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger. I mean, get this. I mean, he is just evil. He's went from the land being in the right place after Hezekiah to bringing in idolatry, astronomy, worship, pagan altars in the temple, human sacrifices, witchcraft, psychics, mediums, people who speak the demons into the dead. But he did more than that. Look at this. Manasseh led them astray so that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. Now, many people talk about the judgment that the Lord brought down on the people of Canaan and the people that lived in that area, using the Israelites and Joshua and the army as his means of judgment. And a lot of people think the Lord was terrible and mean for destroying entire tribes of people, just eliminating all the people and burning down the entire city and getting rid of all of it. But that was a God's judgment on them for their great paganism, for their great sin. And it wasn't like those people didn't know the Lord. They all came from the same families. So yes, they did know the Lord. They made a choice not to follow him. And so God cleared the land for the Israelites, but he did it through judgment on a people who were wicked, wicked, wicked. Well, now we have Manasseh who is doing the same things that they did, and he actually was doing worse than they did. It says that he was a worse influence and worse king and worse sinner than they were. But he didn't stop there. There's more. Look in verse 16. Verse 16 says, "Moreover, Manasseh also shed much innocent blood, that he filled Jerusalem from end to end, besides the sin that he had caused Judah to commit, so that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord." He was a murderous king. And it reminds me of like the Roman kings to come, the ones that we consider Nero and Caligula, those who killed Christians or just killed people out of hand, just didn't have any respect for human life, and that they just killed people on a whim. That's what Manasseh is doing here. He just shed innocent blood, and so much he said it filled Jerusalem with the blood of the innocents. Oh, this angered God to no end. The Lord hates the shedding of innocent blood. So what does the Lord say? He says in verse 11, "Manasseh king of Judah has committed these detestable sins. He has done more evil than the Amorites who preceded him, and has led Judah into sin with his idols. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am going to bring such disaster on Jerusalem and Judah that the ears of everyone who hears of it will tingle. I will stretch out over Jerusalem the measuring line used against Samaria and the plumb line used against the house of Ahab. I will wipe out Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. I will forsake the remnant of my inheritance and hand them over to their enemies. They will be looted and plundered by all their foes, because they have done evil in my eyes and provoked me to anger from the day their forefathers came out of Egypt until this day." So you wonder who was the worst. We hear about Ahab and we hear about Jezebel and how bad they were and what they did. We hear about Ahaz and we hear about these terrible kings in Israel and a couple of bad ones in Judah. But you ever wonder which one's the worst? The Lord himself says that Manasseh was the worst. He was the worst. He did worse than all the other ones before him, worse than the people that he judged before they moved there. And then on top of that, he became evil in that he just shed innocent blood. He shed innocent blood. Pure evil. So the Lord finally said, after all these years, centuries, enough is enough. Enough is enough. You think I judged Israel? I did judge Israel. Samaria is what he's saying. I'm going to judge you too. I'm judging Jerusalem. I'm judging Judah. Enough is enough. My bowl of wrath is full. It is time for it to be spilled out on Judah and on Jerusalem. You have lost my protection. I have promised retribution. I have promised a judgment for so long, and now it's going to happen. And I'm going to judge you by the same line that I judged Ahab and the same line that I judged all the kings of Israel by. And I am going to wipe the map clear of you. I'm going to clean it up like I wash a dish and you wipe one side and wipe the other. There's going to be nothing left. I am done with this kind of sin. Now, all those who are parents out there will understand this. because you have a teenager or you have a child that has asked for something or has done something and they just keep doing it, and you tell them, now you need to stop. Matter of fact, when they're little, we use those, now I'm going to count to 3. Better not let me get to 3. 1, 2, all right, 2.5. 2 3/4. I'm almost to 3. You don't want me to get to 3, and we just keep postponing the judgment. But all of us at some point reach the last straw. Okay, that's it. Time for a whooping. And the Lord's patience is far greater than ours. Matter of fact, I would say his patience is really endless and remarkable. However, his judgment is also true. And there has to be a time of judgment, or he ceases to be good and right and the God of justice. There has to be that time. And so he will delay it for different reasons, giving more opportunities, giving more chances for people to come to him, to turn to him. Maybe this next guy will. But at some point, that's enough. Judgment's coming, and you can't stop it. But what do they say? The bill comes due. That's it. The bill comes due at some point. Was that it for Manasseh? Is he just the most evil king that ever lived? I'm going to show you something now that you probably you have to put together. You have to read the scripture to put it together. Manasseh is not just talked about in 2 Kings. He's actually talked about in 2 Chronicles too. And 1st and 2nd Kings are almost the same as 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They're 2 different perspectives on the same stories. And that's a good thing to have. Just like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are 4 different gospels about the life of Jesus, and we get 4 different perspectives on the same stories about Jesus. And sometimes we get a bonus story that maybe someone else didn't tell. And that's what happens in this case. So I strongly urge you sometime this week to just read 1st and 2nd Chronicles to get different perspectives on what we've already studied. When we leave this study this week, we're going to skip the Chronicles because we've already studied these characters and these people. But I encourage you to read them in your own time. Read 1st and 2nd Chronicles where you can get a different perspective of these stories. But I'm going to take you there right now. So let's go to 2nd Chronicles chapter 33. Now, the first 9 verses of chapter 33 of 2nd Chronicles just affirm everything that is said in 2nd Kings. It talks about how he is the worst. He's the worst of the worst, and he did awful, awful things. But you need to look at verse 10. Let's look at verse 10 and 11. Verse 10. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So the Lord brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. So the Lord didn't wait to judge Manasseh. No, he put an end to Manasseh's evil. Even on the spot, he allowed the Assyrians to take him prisoner. And this is pretty severe how they took their prisoners. And we see this played again in different cultures throughout time. People putting a shackle around the neck, putting a ring in the nose, or a hook. There's some that put a hook in their cheek. Well, this one put a hook in his nose like a large fisher's hook, would put it in the nose right through that cartilage, right in the center of the nose, and pull them along. That's terrible. I mean, that's like being a fish on a hook and being dangled along behind somebody and coming along. I'm sorry. What happened to Manasseh is not funny. Well, it just reminds me of a funny story. When I was in college, when I was in college, a friend of mine, this girl that I was dating in college, her name was Terry, loved to go fishing, and she would go fishing with her father all the time. And I've never been much of a fisherman, but we went fishing and everything, and so we got out some minnow, and she was trying to tell me how to put minnow on the hook, and I'd always put it, through the backbone and throwing it out there. She goes, "Oh, no, that's not how you do it." He says, "You put the hook right in their eye, through the middle, the bridge between and out the other eye. You just poke them right through the eyes and catch that cartilage right there." She says, and they don't even, she says they don't feel it, but it makes them wiggle a lot. So they really become good bait. I said, "What do you mean they don't feel it?" "Oh, my dad, when I was a little girl, he told me they don't feel it. So they don't feel it when you do that." I said, "Your dad lied to you. Why do you think they're wiggling around so much? They're in great pain and they've just been blinded. That's why they're moving so much. It may be a good way to hook them, but boy, it doesn't feel good." And she was totally upset with me and told me I was wrong. And she called her dad, and he said, "Yeah, baby, I told you that just where you'd be better about it when you were a little girl." Oh, side story. Anyway, so just like the poor minnows, they put the cartilage, put it in the cartilage there of the nose. They put that hook and they dragged him to Assyria. And we see this again when we study the story of Jonah and Nineveh, by the way, that this was just one of the things that the Assyrians did that was really dominating and evil. So he had a hook in his nose and he had bronze shackles on and he was led away. What happens? Verse 12. In his distress, he sought the favor of the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. And when he prayed, the Lord was moved to his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. Manasseh hit rock bottom. He had never given the Lord a thought. He totally disregarded the warnings from the prophets, totally disregarded the admonitions that he needed to repent. And then he was caught. And then he was paying consequences for his sin. And he was being dragged away as a slave. And he humbled himself before God. And he begged God to forgive him. And God not only forgave him, he gave him his kingdom back. And it said Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. So what's Manasseh do after that? Let's read that. Afterward, he rebuilt the outer wall of the city of David west of the Gihon, spring in the valley, as far as the entrance of the fish gate and encircling the hill of Ophel. He made it much higher. He stationed military commanders in all fortified cities in Judah. He got rid of the foreign gods and removed the image from the temple of the Lord, as well as the altars he had built on the temple hill in Jerusalem, and threw them out of the city. Then he restored the altar of the Lord and sacrificed fellowship offerings and thank offerings on it, and told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. This was a heart change in Manasseh. This wasn't just, Lord, if you get me out of this situation, I will serve you kind of thing, which we've all kind of been in that situation. Lord, if you just help me pass this test, I promise I'll study a lot more diligently. Lord, if you just get me out of this situation, I promise I won't do the sin that got me into this situation again. That doesn't seem to be what happened here with Manasseh. When Manasseh was brought back and God restored him, he acknowledged the Lord as God, and he had a change of heart. And that is a beautiful thing. So what's a great lesson we can learn from this? From the worst king, the absolute worst king of all Judah and all of Israel, Manasseh, what's a lesson we can learn from that? First lesson we can learn is that God is merciful. God is full of grace. He is compassionate. He is listening. He is mindful of your prayers, of your entreaties, of your confessions, and he heard Manasseh. He heard Manasseh's prayer. And even though he was the most pure evil king that of the Israelites, God forgave him. God forgave him. And you're worried that God won't forgive you of your sin? You're worried that you got to fix yourself up and clean yourself up before God will forgive you? You think that God won't forgive the sin that's in your life? To borrow a phrase of someone in the news lately, come on, man. Come on, man. Of course he will. That should get you excited. We have a God who forgives like that, can forgive sins like that. This is far worse than anything we've seen. We have an awesome God. Here's the second thing we can learn from this. Read the whole story. Read the footnotes that are in your Bible. Read the references to the other parts of the Bible and get the full perspective of what's going on in some of these stories. Now, there are many times when there won't be any footnotes and there won't be any references to another part of the Bible, and that's fine. Then just read around a particular verse. Always try to read things in context, and if possible, get as much reference and perspective as you can. Because the Bible is a rich, deep story. And these are real people, and their lives are complicated. Just like you and I. They are not just two-dimensional. So that's a good lesson for us. And like I said, read Chronicles, because you'll get a different perspective on a lot that we've studied already on the kings of Israel and Judah. All right, so we've covered the worst king. And it ends up being a pretty good story. But now let's talk about the best king. The best king. And again, I'm not the one making that claim. We'll see it in Scripture. The best king is Josiah. After Manasseh died, his son took over the throne, but he didn't last very long. He was evil, and he was assassinated. And then his son was put on the throne. And so this is the grandson of Manasseh. Verse 1 of chapter 22. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. Verse 2. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in all the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. Again, I'm guarding the microphone. It's getting quite windy out here. We see something here that we haven't seen with a lot of the kings. We see here that Josiah walked in the way of David. It didn't just mention his fathers. It didn't just mention his forefathers or his grandfather or anyone else. It mentions David. He says he walked like David before the Lord. And we get another compliment when he says that he never turned to the right or to the left. He never wavered. Just like David never wavered in his love of the Lord. Now, David sinned. We covered that. And Josiah will sin too. They're not perfect, but they didn't waver in their allegiance. Never wavered in their heart who they were devoted to, who is the Lord of their life. And never worshiped or played around with worshiping other idols or any of the other kind of idolatry that was going on around them. So Josiah, from 8 years old, started living right. And when he was king for 18 years, so now what's that make him? 26 years old. Now he's 26 years old. We see that he did a great thing, that he repaired the temple, that he called together and he repaired the temple, and he paid people to do it and had another capital campaign. But I want you to catch something that happens in verse 8. And it says, Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, I found the book of law in the temple of the Lord. He gave it to Shaphan, who read it. Then Shaphan the secretary went to the king and reported to him. He says, we've done what you've asked us to do about the temple. We've got the supervisors and the foremen, and we're working on the temple. Look at verse 10. Then Shaphan the secretary informed the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. Somehow the book of law had been lost. Now, they don't have the same kind of printing presses that we have. And they certainly don't have the digital capacity to remember thousands and thousands of books on one hard drive. They don't have any of that. No, their books are scrolls, and they're handwritten. And it takes great pain, great time, great dedication to make a reprinting of one book. But this book was to be protected. This was the book of law. This was the book of law handed down with the covenant from Moses to the leaders of the people and passed down and kept in the temple. Well, with all the idolatry and evil and worshiping of other gods in the temple, obviously they weren't worshiping the Lord, and it got discarded. But the Lord protected it. And now that the time is right, and he's got a king after his own heart again, the book of law is discovered, it's found, and they read it. Let's look what he did in verse 11. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes, and he gave these orders. Let's skip down past the names. Verse 13. Go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all Judah about what is written in the book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that burns against us because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book. They have not acted in accordance with all that is written there concerning us. He was concerned. Josiah was concerned because as they were reading, they saw how far they had drifted, how far they had gotten away from the ordinances and laws and rules that he had given his people to follow and how they were to worship the Lord. I always love it when a king or when someone in the Old Testament tears their robes. When they tear their robes, they're always they're in great distress. Either they're very angry or they're very upset. They don't know what to do. They're showing that they're overwhelmed by this. Imagine what it'd be like. Imagine what it'd be like if that happened today. If someone came in and gave you a bit of news that you didn't want to hear. I had a wreck in the car today. And just rip it off. That would be different in our culture, wouldn't it? No, we don't rip our clothes very often. They cost too much. All right. So Hilkiah the priest and these other officials went to seek out a prophet of the Lord to answer Josiah the king's question about what they needed to do, because they were clearly in disobedience to the Lord in the way that they were worshiping, and not only them, but had been for generations not doing it right. So who did they go to? They actually went to a woman. They went to a prophetess, a lady prophet. We don't see many of those in the Bible, but they are there. And so at this time, the main prophet in the land was a lady, and they went to her and they asked her, what do we need to do? Answer the king's questions. Please seek the Lord and find out what we need to do, and how angry he is with us against this. And this lady, she tells them, oh no, the Lord's angry. No, what he said is going to come true. He is going to wipe Jerusalem and Judah off the map. You will all definitely be judged. So this is what she said to them. Verse 15, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, King Josiah, This is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on this place and its people according to everything written in the book the king of Judah has read. Because they have forsaken me and burned incense to other gods and provoked me to anger by all the idols that their hands have made, my anger will burn against this place and will not be quenched. Tell the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of the Lord, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Now we're going to get to the good news. Concerning the words of your heart. Verse 19. Because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before the Lord, when you heard what I have spoken against this place and its people, and that they would become accursed and laid waste, and because you tore your robes and wept in my presence, I have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be buried in peace, and your eyes will not see all the disaster I'm going to bring on this place. So they took her answer back to the king. Once again, we see a God who hears the prayer and the desire and the cry of the king. He delays the judgment for Josiah's lifetime. He makes him a promise. The same promise, actually, he made Hezekiah, his grandfather. He said, I'm going to do these things to your family, but it's going to be, you're going to live your life and it's going to be after you die. So the same promise he made to Hezekiah, where Hezekiah just went, okay, that's fine, as long as it doesn't affect me. He does the same thing to Josiah. He says, because you humbled yourself and you're passionate about this and you're wanting to do the right thing, I'm not going to bring this disaster that is going to happen. Judgment's happening. I'm not changing that. But I'm not going to bring it on you. I'm going to wait until your reign is over and you have went on to rest with your fathers. Well, how did Josiah react to that? And I really want you to catch this. Because so far, Josiah is a good king, but he's not the greatest king yet. What does he do? How does he respond to God's promise and gift of peace to him in his time? Does he just go, great, like Hezekiah did? Good, it's not going to affect me. Let's go live our lives. That's not at all what Josiah did. But the first thing he did is he renewed the covenant. I want you to look in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 23. Then the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the men of Judah, the people of Jerusalem, the priests and the prophets, all the people from the least to the greatest. He read in the hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The king stood by the pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord and to keep his commandments, regulations, and decrees with all of his heart and all his soul, thus confirming the words of the covenant written in the book. Then all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. He renewed the vows that they had made generations ago in front of Moses and in front of Joshua, that they would love the Lord with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and would not have any other gods before them. He renewed the covenant between the king and the people, and between the king and the people and God. But that wasn't enough. After that, he went on a spiritual military campaign to destroy everything evil in Judah. And not just Judah, Israel as well. I mean, he was serious about it. He destroyed everything. He went and he destroyed the altars and he destroyed all the temples and anything that was out there, even just the small ones out, and the Asherah poles, and he just took them all down and he desecrated them where they would never be used again. And all the people that were prophets, he burned their bones on top of them. And so he destroyed all the prophets and got rid of the witches and the mediums and everything that had been raised up in 300 to 400 years, but not just in Judah. Like I said, he did it in Israel as well, which wasn't even his land. It was ruled by the king of Assyria. That was a risky thing to do, yet he still went there and he cleansed the entire land of idol worship. Cleansed it all after he had made this wonderful renewing of the covenant with the people. But it didn't say he had to do that. He didn't have to do that for God's promise. God made him a promise of peace without saying if or and you do this, I'll give you peace. No, he said, I'm giving you peace. So Josiah went above and beyond that. And after he did all that stuff, they had a great spiritual event. They had Passover. Now, they had not celebrated Passover like they should have celebrated Passover for years beyond memory. Look at verse 21. Then the king gave this order to all the people: celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God as it is written in this book of the covenant. In verse 22, not since the days of the judges who led Israel, nor throughout the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah had any such Passover been observed. So in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem. They had a wonderful, renewing, spiritual event with their Passover. That's wonderful. I love that. I say it's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. That was a beautiful event for them to have Passover and celebrate, which is when the covenant was first made. They were able to celebrate the renewing of the covenant after they had done the great work of cleansing the land. That had to be a spiritual high for the people of Israel. Look at verse 25. Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all of his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, in accordance with all the law of Moses. I didn't say he was the best. God said he was the best. Josiah was a king that gave everything he had to the Lord. His heart, his soul, his mind, and his strength. All of his power he gave. He used it to cleanse the land and to follow God. How different would our lives be if we gave our heart, our soul, but more than that, used our mind and our strength, all of our abilities to serve the Lord? How different would our life be? I'll tell you one thing, we'd be a lot more like Josiah. We have a great lesson from Josiah, and I want you to catch it, because again, I can't overemphasize the fact that just like his grandfather Hezekiah, he was promised peace in his time, but his grandfather had said, well, that's good. It was not his grandfather. It's his great-grandfather. Just like his great-grandfather, Hezekiah, had been given peace in his time, and he said, oh, that's fine, that's good, thank you, as long as, the judgment doesn't happen to me in my time, I'm okay with that, and just went on and lived the rest of his life. Josiah was not satisfied with that. When he was given peace in his time, he still followed the Lord with all that he had. So here's the lesson. Here's the lesson that we get from Josiah's life. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, regardless of the circumstances and the conditions that you're living in. Love him because it is right. He is worthy, not because it benefits you, not because he's going to bless you, but because he's worthy of that praise and worthy of your devotion. He created you. He loves you. He blesses you. He is worthy of all that you can give him and more. And that's a great lesson we learn from Josiah. Jesus tells us in the New Testament that he has come that he might give us life and give us life more abundantly. I truly believe that that abundant life that he's talking about is not the hereafter. That abundant life that he's talking about is the here and now. That when we follow Jesus with all that we have, that we will have a far more abundant and more full life, full of joy, love, and peace now. Fellowship with the Lord now and in the hereafter. Well, that brings us to chapter 24 and 25. We've went over the best and the worst king, and now the Lord did not tarry at all after Josiah died. Things started changing really quick in Judah, and Pharaoh took over, and he was king there, and they paid him tribute. And then after that, a name that we're familiar with, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, came in. And sure enough, what did Nebuchadnezzar do? Nebuchadnezzar came in and he conquered the whole land, and he took away all the best people and took them into exile. Who did he take into exile that we're going to study soon? He took Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He took the best of the best people from Judah to make them servants in his palace in Babylon. And then he just got rid of the rest, or sent them out to be slaves throughout his kingdom, which by that time had taken over Pharaoh's kingdom, and he was just the great new superpower, Nebuchadnezzar. But didn't I tell you that the Babylonians would come back? Hezekiah had shown them all the wealth and all the wonderful things that were in the temple. Nebuchadnezzar came and he took them all. He took everything. I want to read a little bit of it because it's the fulfillment of all the prophecies that have been made about the judgment that was coming on the people of Israel. Well, in verse 13 and 14 of chapter 24, we see that they took the best people. And then after that, Zedekiah became king, and the Lord must have hardened his heart because he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, the superpower, when he didn't have the power to do that. So Nebuchadnezzar came back and laid siege to all of Jerusalem for a couple of years until they had nothing. They tried to break out. They broke out in the middle of the night and tried to run away from Nebuchadnezzar's army, but they caught them. And listen to what they did to Zedekiah, verse 7. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then they put out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. So for his treachery, they made sure that the last thing Zedekiah saw in his life was his sons dying. And then they made him live, which was a torture. Then in verse 9, he set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. This is what was predicted. This was what was prophesied would happen. Remember, he's going to wipe it like he's wiping a plate clean. But fire was also predicted, and that it would all burn down. And the temple, which Solomon had built, burned to the ground. And then he destroyed all the walls and everything to where there was nothing standing on top of another. Just destroyed it all. Later this year, we'll get to go over what the prophet Jeremiah said. Prophet Jeremiah was alive during this time, and that poor prophet had to experience and witness all of this going on, and no one would listen to him. Then verse 13, the Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands, and the bronze sea that were at the temple of the Lord, and they carried the bronze of Babylon. They also took the pots, the shovels, the wick trimmers, the dishes, and all the bronze articles used in the temple service. They took the dishes. They took everything. And why that actually, the fact that they took dishes is going to be an important part of a story coming up in Daniel. But they took it all. I mean, we talk about taking everything but the kitchen sink. They took the kitchen sink. They took everything and everything of value, and it is all gone. They leveled and emptied the land, especially Jerusalem. And what is our lesson from that? God keeps his promises. He promised this kind of judgment. He said, if you don't follow me, if you keep up with this idolatry, that I will judge you. And then as they kept wasting their second chances, God said the judgment is going to get bad. It's getting bad. It's going to be really bad. And then you're going to spend years and years in exile. And he even tells them through the prophets, you're going to spend 70 years in exile, and I'm going to cleanse this land. And he does. God keeps his word. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength like Josiah did, in spite of your conditions or circumstances. And know, like we learned already tonight from Manasseh, that God is merciful and he will hear your prayers and he will forgive your sin. But also know that God is going to judge sin. And take comfort in that, especially when you see sin in the world. Know that judgment is coming, that God will not be mocked, and that his name is great and it will stay great. So that finishes up the story, the era, how do you say that? Era. I guess era. That covers this era of the story of the people of God. I mean, we've had several that we've went through. I mean, we had what led up to with Abraham and them the growing and the establishment of the people with Abraham and Jacob and Israel, and then we had their time that they were in Egypt, and then we had the time that they were in the wilderness, and then we had the time that they conquered the land, and the time of judges, and then we had the time of kings, and now the time of kings has come to an end, and the people have been exiled from the land. Jews are scattered all over the world, and the best of them are taken to Babylon to serve under King Nebuchadnezzar. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Well, we'll study that. Our next lesson will be in Ezra. Ezra talks about the rebuilding of the temple and what happens near the end of the exile. And we're going to get into all that as we continue our study and as we move forward in the Word. I hope you've enjoyed these lessons. I enjoyed being with you tonight. I hope it's not been too windy. But these are great lessons that we've learned, great stories that we've been able to cover from the Word of God. I'll see you next week.